Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my top 10 tips going into the 2020 fantasy football season. I'll be sharing my favorite tips and tricks going into this upcoming season to not only help you guys out as a rule of thumb, but to try to help you guys win some 2020 fantasy football championships. So that's what we're on schedule for today. Now, before we begin, I know I talk a lot, but I cannot thank you guys enough. It's absolutely been incredible, the amount of support. We're almost there. We're trying to get to that 16K subscriber mark. So for those of you who are new to the channel, make sure you click that subscribe button, join the community. Also, tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we'll be doing a live stream here on the channel where I'll be giving away draft guides, talking to you guys, answering some questions for a little bit of time. So please, if you guys are interested, join ahead, come on in, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Now that we've covered all of that, we can go ahead and move on to our top 10 tips and tricks going into the 2020 fantasy football season. Starting off with tip number 1, know your league rules. Now, why exactly am I suggesting this? Because again, different leagues have different rules. They have different scoring formats. They have different waiver wire rules. They have different trading rules. These things need to be known prior to your draft because there's a huge difference between playing in a standard or a full PPR league. I mean, last season, James White finished as the number 29 running back in a standard format. In comparison to in a half-point PPR format, finishes the number 22 back. And in a full PPR format, he finishes the number 18 back. The amount of point differential between playing in a standard league and a full PPR league for players like James White is humongous. I mean, yes, Christian McCaffrey last season was the number 1 running back regardless of scoring format. But understanding that you get extra points for return yards or get extra points for, your player kicking a 50-yard field goal or more. These are different things that could lead to success, and knowing it prior to your draft, prior to your season beginning, is a huge advantage far and away. Now, there's other scoring formats like a 4-point versus a 6-point per passing touchdown format. I mean, in 3 out of the last 4 seasons, there have been at least 6 running quarterbacks that have surpassed 250 rushing yards in the top 12 quarterbacks by the end of the season. I mean, last season in 2019, from Lamar Jackson to Jameis, Dak, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, all of these quarterbacks finished within the top 7 of the quarterback position in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. And they all had over 250 rushing yards. Is this a surprise? I mean, it shouldn't really be, because the value of a running quarterback in a 4-point per passing touchdown format is just unbelievable. An extra 250 rushing yards, even though that equates to 25 points, that's 6 passing touchdowns in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. And that's a pretty big difference, especially considering in 2018, there was 9 quarterbacks that threw for over 30 touchdowns. And just this past year in 2019, there was only 4. So an extra 6, touchdowns of points, that's a pretty big difference maker. On top of that, the difference in terms of 25 points is the difference between having the number 12 overall quarterback or the number 7 overall quarterback. It's also the difference in looking at the last decade of quarterbacks. Every quarterback that has surpassed 250 rushing yards in the past decade. I went ahead and I did a little bit of stats. I went a little bit extra on the breakdown, but I found that if you went ahead and you ran for 250 yards at the quarterback position, you averaged at least 3.44 rushing touchdowns in that current season. So you go ahead, you take that 25-point boost, you throw another 18 points on top of it, you got yourself a pretty comfortable advantage with a 43-point boost just because you're a mobile quarterback. Just putting it out there, understanding the value of players based on the format is going to make a huge difference and could help you overall. Now, other things in terms of your league rules. Knowing the positions that you can start. If you could start 3 wide receivers on your starting lineup, that's even better. Go ahead and maybe invest more in wide receivers because you know they're going to be more consistent on wide receiver 2 range in comparison to the wide receiver 3 or 4 range, or maybe having to skip out on an early running back that you're not comfortable with. You can go ahead and stock up on wide receivers and not be really punished for it. If you play in a league with an extra flex position, maybe you can draft an extra running back early. Instead of starting and only having 3 running backs within the first 6 rounds, maybe you want an extra running back because the value was there, a player dropped to you, and you can find a starting spot for them on a weekly basis. On top of that, another thing I want to suggest, everyone should be having an IR slot this upcoming season. I always run with IR slots because I always want to be able to give people the opportunity that even if their star player gets hurt, they have the ability to pick up their backup and not have to drop somebody immediately because of that and be in a disadvantageous position because of something out of their total control. In this upcoming season with COVID, you should honestly have 2 IR slots minimum on your rosters, especially with teams or leagues that have really small benches because you play in a 16-man league or anything of that nature. You need to have multiple IR slots to make sure that everybody's good to go. On top of that, the waiver rules. If you don't know your waiver rules, whether you're playing with a fab league or a continual rolling list, these are difference makers. This is the game within the game. Fantasy football is a game, but within fantasy football, there's the game of, hey, you know what? I got some extra fab here. Maybe I could throw it on this player, pick him up instead of, my league mate that could potentially be playing me this week. I'm going to go ahead and outbid him here, take this player, then eventually trade it to somebody else, get another player. There's a game within a game to play. And understanding your waiver rules could then lead to you being able to make extra moves and make a difference overall in your team's roster and or overall output, or potentially, taking players away from others. Could be a pretty good strategy. Anyway, that is rule number 1. Now that we've covered our bases, we can go on and move on to number 2, research. Now, fantasy football a lot of the times has the connotation of fantasy football is all about luck. It's all about, getting lucky on a week. That's not the fact of the matter. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of research that can be done to predict upcoming events. And that's what we want to do. That's what we've done all off season. I've spent so much time researching fantasy football to try to give ourselves as much of an advantage during the regular season and prior to our drafts to make sure that we can accumulate and create the best possible advantage right out the gate. Now, a lot of you may not have the time to go ahead and research, but I went and did that this offseason. I spent a lot of this offseason researching and creating Andrew Kiorkof's 2020 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. So for those of you who haven't done the research and haven't spent the time looking at different statistics, being able to watch every single video, and I know there's a lot of YouTubers here, and they all put out great content, but researching yourself, that's going to be hard. But if you're looking to just go ahead, find an affordable way to just find information that's going to help to your overall success before the season even begins, that's the way I would suggest you go about it. And all the information regarding that down in the description of the video for those of you who are interested. Moving on to tip number 3, running backs. You can never have too many running backs in fantasy football. In fact, if I have a 16-man roster and 6 of those players are running backs, I'm ecstatic, because not only am I going to have 3 running backs that are studs and be able to contribute on a weekly basis, I have guys on my bench that either have a high upside, are handcuffs, and can eventually contribute down the road. Whether it's a bye week, an injury, anything that takes place, I want to have as many running backs as possible, because running backs are really the thing that lead to success in fantasy football. I mean, let's think about the players that have led people to fantasy championships. Last year, Christian McCaffrey. The 2 years before was Todd Gurley. The year before that, David Johnson. These are players that in the passing game, on the ground, it doesn't matter. The running back position has so much opportunity for success. They get so many touchdowns on the ground. I mean, these are guys that are scoring 16 plus touchdowns a season. Nobody can compete with that in fantasy football. And sure, there are a couple quarterbacks over the last couple of years that have put their hat in terms of I can carry a singular fantasy team. But overall, the running back position has always been something of so much value, and especially pass catching running backs. I mean, last season, amongst all players, Christian McCaffrey had the second most receptions in the National Football League, only behind Michael Thomas. When we look at Austin Eckler's stats last year and only isolate the receiving work he had out of the backfield, I mean, he would have finished as the number 15 wide receiver in a half PPR scoring format if you had just isolated his receiving stats and not even mentioned his rushing ability. That in itself, ridiculous, considering the fact that he's going to rush the ball over 100 times, or at least 150 times, maybe even more. The amount of opportunity RBs get, the workhorse running backs that touch the ball 300, 350 times a year, that kind of opportunity cannot be passed up on. So when you go for an early round wide receiver, understand that you got to address the running back position, because the running back position has always been consistent in fantasy football. In 3 out of the last 4 seasons, the top 12 flex players by the end of the year have been 8 running backs in 3 out of those 4 seasons. So that means majority of the time, 75% of the top 12 players in fantasy football between the running back, wide receiver, and tight end position, 75% of them are typically running backs by the end of the year. And that's not really a surprise. And that's why 8 running backs come off the board in the first round, if not more, because people understand how valuable it is to get that running back right away and have them carry your roster. But either way, the running back position, you can never have too many. Draft as many as you can. But the next thing that I wanted to talk about is another tip, handcuffs. Handcuffs kind of relates to running backs, but it's our tip number 4, because you need to draft your respective running backs handcuffs, or you can even draft an opposing, league mate's handcuff. Now, what is a handcuff? For those of you who aren't familiar, a handcuff is a backup running back that is an insurance policy that if in fact the starting player is to get injured, this player would then subsequently get more opportunity and become the starter based on the injury that happened to the player that was above him in the overall depth chart. For example, if Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, God forbid, I mean, please don't happen. Please, Christian, don't. If it happens, Reggie Bonifant, that's his immediate backup. He would eventually get his work. Now, he's not going to be Christian McCaffrey. He's not coming in and catching 100 plus passes, but he's going to have the starting work in the Carolina Panthers backfield. And why not invest in potentially ensuring that this upcoming season? For players that have injury history and have injury risk, like a Dalvin Cook, the ability to go and draft Alexander Mattison and have him on roster is such a great insurance policy. But for those of you who don't even own Dalvin Cook, you can go and invest in an Alexander Mattison, in a Latavius Murray, in a Tony Pollard, and make sure that you have the immediate backup to one of these blue chip running backs that are all, pretty much on that fringe of, hey, if I go down, the next guy that's going to take my spot is going to be just as successful as me, because we've seen Latavius Murray walk in to the New Orleans starting running back job last season against the Cardinals and against the Bears. And he had, 28 points a game in those two game stretch. We've seen Alexander Mattison step up even when Dalvin Cook was down and produce. We've seen Tony Pollard in the second half of a Miami game last year step up and have 100 rushing yards. We've seen the success, and it's 100% something you have to do. You have to ensure your investments. If you're going to invest a first-round pick into a running back that has injury history, you have to be aware that you need to go ahead and ensure that. Now, let's say, for example, like I was mentioning earlier, you don't have Dalvin Cook. No problem. Go draft Alexander Mattison. You don't have Kenyon Drake. No problem. Go draft Chase Edmonds. You don't have Miles Sanders. He's dealing with an injury as well. Go ahead and draft Boston Scott. Go and get handcuffs. Regardless of whether you own the starter or not, you will eventually have a potential backup that could become a starter who's either a trade piece or someone that you could play on your weekly lineup every single week because of the value that they gain based on an injury. Moving on. Rookies. Now, rookie running backs has always been something or another. This is our tip number 5. Know your rookies. Rookie running backs or wide receivers, or maybe quarterbacks or tight ends, but typically the rookie quarterback, outside of maybe one guy a season having a pop-off year, that's something we kind of stay away from. The rookie tight end position hasn't been relevant since, Evan Ingram in 2017 or Gronkowski in the early, 2010s? Not interested in, rookie tight ends. But when it comes to rookie running backs and wide receivers, know who is on, the list. Understand the amount of talent and opportunity that they have this upcoming season. I've seen a lot of people in the comment section say, Clyde Edwards-Helaire should not have been in your 8th tier in your RB tier list. Listen, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to be the starting running back of the best offense in the National Football League. You cannot tell me that he's not going to have the opportunity there. And with what he's done in the past, what he's shown on tape, just go watch the Alabama game. Him playing against Alabama last year. Just watching the tape, he is going to be such a successful prospect out of that backfield that we have to anticipate success. If we went ahead and applied that same logic to Saquon Barkley in years past, Ezekiel Elliott in years past, and said, you know what, he hasn't proven anything, let's avoid him, then you're missing out on guys that win leagues. Jonathan Taylor's, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, these are running backs that can make instant progress and production for your fantasy teams. And maybe if you didn't know about them, you wouldn't have drafted them. But if you go ahead and you learn about them, these rookies could lead to your overall success. On top of that, it's not just the rookies that have big names or the automatic starters. Guys like J.K. Dobbins, guys like Zach Moss, guys like Anthony McFarland, DJ Dallas, Joshua Kelly, right? These are guys that a lot of people Antonio Gibson, they're down in the list in terms of ADP, and you may see their name and you're thinking, what about it? Let's not forget, Alvin Kamara and Kareem Hunt were both the number 3 and number 4 overall running backs in a half PPR their rookie seasons. I mean, they came out of nowhere. Why? Because they were given opportunity because of an injury occurring or Alvin Kamara having a couple good games and then them eventually releasing Adrian Peterson that year. Over time, if you go ahead and invest in a rookie running back and maybe it takes them 8 weeks, that's fine. Let him take 8 weeks. But once he gets the starting spot or is given the opportunity, he's going to run away with it. Think about Miles Sanders last year. That's what he did. So you want to also invest in guys that have smaller names and don't immediately have the starting job because eventually it could be theirs. Moving on. Our next tip on hand, tip number 6. Don't put all your eggs in a singular basket. Now, what exactly does that mean? That means I don't want you to be drafting 3+ players from a singular team. Having 2 players from a singular team on your roster is fine. If I'm stacking Drew Brees and Michael Thomas, I like that stack. If I'm stacking, Lamar Jackson with Mark Andrews, I like that as well. But if you're going to go ahead and you're going to take AJ Green, Joe Mixon, and Tyler Boyd, you are basically leaving your team up to the mercy of how the Cincinnati Bengals succeed this upcoming season. If you want to go ahead and draft Edelman, Cam Newton, and James White, you're going to leave your team success, your overall fantasy success, to that singular team because they own so much, or the majority of your team's overall output. If they have a bad game, you're going to have a bad game. And that in itself is a little rough. Now, sure, there are some combinations where you can go get Mahomes, Kelsey, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, or Mahomes, Kelsey, and Tyreek Hill, and perhaps find success because they're all the top of their own position. But when we're looking at drafting, like let's say, for example, I want to draft Allen Robinson, David Montgomery, and Tariq Cohen. That kind of a stack's not going to work. I would much rather have a Breeze, Kamara, and a Michael Thomas if I'm going to stack all my eggs in one basket, because I know the offense is potent and I know that they're going to succeed. But when you go ahead and do that with lesser offenses, when you go ahead and stack 2 wide receivers from the same team, it makes it really difficult to go ahead and just put all of your eggs in that basket and hope they're going to succeed without a doubt, without a blink of the eye. But again, just be careful there. Do not invest too much in a singular roster. It could end up backfiring. Moving on, our next tip on hand is post the draft. Okay, everything that we kind of talked about is pre-draft. Now I want to talk about stuff post-draft. After you draft your roster, after those 16 to 18 to 22 rounds have surpassed and you have your overall roster, do not look at that roster and think, well, my season's over, I had a bad draft. Because the roster that you have on day one after your draft is not the same roster that you're going to have at the end of the year. There are 17 weeks of a fantasy football season. Majority of us playing in a 16-week schedule. Everybody please do that. But there are so many weeks of fantasy football. And just because you drafted a team that you may not like, or you may have, got a little bit less value at the running back position, or maybe you should have went after a tight end earlier. Just because you have a roster like that you're down on, or even if you have a roster that you're super high on, you know what? I got the best roster in the league. It's over. I don't even have to pay attention to this thing. If you come at it with that kind of mentality, you're not going to find success, because the honest opinion of me is, because the honest truth is, in fantasy football, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You don't win on draft day. You get advantages on draft day, but from week 1 through week 16, your roster is going to look completely different. If you go on ahead and have the same roster from week 1 through 16, you're either a genius or someone that literally stopped looking at their lineup at week 4 because you went 1-3. So to be honest, don't come at fantasy football with that mentality of, you know what, my draft didn't go well, therefore I'm over. It's over. Fantasy football is all about being able to adapt, attacking the waiver wire, making trades, and improving your roster over time. So again, you don't win your league on draft day, and you definitely don't 100% lose it. There's always a marathon. There's always the ability to change your lineup and improve it over the weeks. Do not forget that. Moving on to our next tip, it's overthinking your starting lineup. So what does that mean exactly? Going into the regular season, as soon as you draft your team and week 1 comes, a lot of people are going to be asking questions about really good players. Should I be starting Todd Gurley even though he's against the toughest matchup this upcoming week? Questions like that, in my opinion, are people overthinking fantasy football. Fantasy football is all about starting your studs and playing the best player that's going to lead to your success. Now, sure, there could be a time where you have a player that has an extremely easy matchup. He plays against the worst secondary and he's going to have a pop-off game. But you decide to sit one of your players that has been a weekly stud for you, but may not have that upside. That in itself is overthinking at times. And though it may lead to your success, in my opinion, it just causes so much more stress on you. I've done it to myself, where on a Sunday morning, I'm sitting there looking at my flex position, trying to weigh the odds and trying to see, who am I starting? Am I doing this? And that in itself really does hurt fantasy teams more than it helps you. You got to play your studs. You got to play the players that have always been consistent for you. And if they haven't been consistent, then don't worry about them. But again, playing your studs and not overthinking fantasy football in terms of who you're starting in that lineup that week and not over stressing about it, that's something you got to, make sure that you do, because a lot of you, kind of go crazy, and I do myself. Trust me, from my own experience, I know how crazy it gets. Moving on, the 9th tip. You got to go ahead, take your smartphone, get your computer, whatever it is, and you need to download an app, whether it's the Sleeper app, whether it's the Fantasy Life app, maybe it's just Twitter. You need to be able to have notifications on from an application that gives you up-to-date news. Okay, Sleeper does that, Fantasy Life does that. They're not even sponsors, I don't care, because it helps you guys overall. Being able to get information immediately as soon as it drops. Being able to know, oh my God, Leonard Fournette got signed by XY team. Oh, Le'Veon Bell's holding out, or James Conner got injured. I need to go pick up his backup. Knowing that information immediately as it occurs is going to lead to your overall success, because you can beat people to the waiver wire. You can make sure that you have, the bid in terms of fab over everybody else right before something happens, or to make sure that you switch out a player out of your lineup. There's so many different things that are going to happen this upcoming season that are going to happen on a whim. 10 minutes before a game, a player's deemed inactive. 5 minutes before a game, a player got sick or tested positive. These things need to be prepared for, and you need to go ahead and draft any fantasy app that you possibly can that's going to give you up-to-date notifications. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, tip number 10, have fun this year. We've all had a pretty crappy offseason, and that's to say the least. And my goodness, we couldn't wait for fantasy football to start. We can't wait till the season begins. Remember that sports are finally going to be back. Football is going to finally be back. Sundays, we're going to be able to do something on a Sunday. We can sit on our couch, watch fantasy football, watch the NFL, enjoy everything. Have fun this season. And I understand a lot of you play for big money, but don't panic. It's a 16-game marathon. We're going to get there. We're going to improve every single week. Do not over-exaggerate after week 1. We'll eventually get there, but have fun overall. Fantasy football is all about having fun. And I know for those of you who play in one league and everything goes awry, maybe you should play in multiple leagues this year. It's going to be fun. Have fun. Don't panic. Don't stress about it. That's my last tip. Enjoy fantasy football this year. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Do not forget, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow afternoon, we'll be doing a giveaway here on the channel for a live stream. Be there or be square. Thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.